So today we are doing a deep dive into coding and thematic analysis in qualitative research using just Microsoft Word. So no fancy software, no expensive software, no AI, just Microsoft Word, something that everybody knows and has on their computer. In later stages of the analysis, I will indicate where you can, if you want to, use AI, such as ChatGPT, to speed up the process. So it's optional. It's not asking AI to do the analysis for you, just to speed up some of the sorting and grouping that we'll be doing with coding. But as I said, it's entirely optional. You can just use Microsoft Word throughout the whole process. I did record a video about using Microsoft Word for thematic analysis a few years ago. It's been pretty popular on this channel, but now it's 2025. And I just updated some of the guidelines based on interactions with you, interactions with my clients. Quite often I come across people who do not have access to specific, more sophisticated professional software. Maybe they're anxious to use such software. So quite often we talk about these things. You know that I don't use, that's not how I analyze the data. I know that I usually use NVivo. So I do prefer to use software. However, if I did not have access to NVivo, that's exactly how I would analyze my data. So you're not missing out or anything. So the analysis will be just as rigorous, just as strong, just as professional as it would be if you use NVivo, Atlas TI, or any qualitative data analysis software. So for this video, for the purpose of coding and doing thematic analysis, I'll be using a sample data set. Of course, I asked ChatGPT to generate this sample data set. And this data set is about cultural bias in training large language models, so basically training AI. It's a sample data just for us to have something to work on, but in fact I recently worked on a study about a cultural bias in training AI or language models, hence the idea. Before we start, I want to also explain what we'll be doing in general, roughly what is the approach we'll be following and what is the end goal, because that's something we have to have in mind before we even start. So I do have a video. I have several videos, but I'll link to the video right now in which I explain the process in general, the process of coding and thematic analysis. So I do like, if you watch this channel, if you subscribe and watch my other videos, you know that I do like to talk about the process of thematic analysis in three main stages. So generally generating initial codes, then the second stage, which is focus coding, and the third stage, which is thematic analysis. I also have a video where I explain how this easily fits into Brown and Clark's 6 stages, so don't worry if that's what you're trying to do. The instructions will be just as relevant and applicable to your context. So I won't have time to go through each stage and all that logic in this video because it will simply be too long. But do feel free to watch that video first so you know where we are going and what we're trying to do, so that whatever I show you in this video right here makes more sense and is just clearer to you. So now let's just dive right into it so we can start coding and develop our themes. What we can see on the screen now is one of these transcripts. I'll be using just 2 transcripts because I don't want the process to take ages if I was to use 10 or 15, but it doesn't matter how many you have, just follow the same process. So this is one of the transcripts. What we need to do first, of course, is to code, but how do we code in Microsoft Word? It, of course, will be manual. It will be something that resembles generally creating notes in the margin, making notes in the margin, something you would be doing if you were, for example, working with printed out data. So how do we do that in Microsoft Word? So we need to create in each file, in each transcript that we have, we need to create a table with 2 columns. In the left-hand side column, we'll have our text, the current transcript, and the right-hand side column is where we'll be writing. So we'll be creating our codes as we read the data. So that's what we'll do now. To make it easier, let's change the layout or the orientation to landscape. So we have a little bit more space. Now we'll select all of this so we can cut it and paste it into the column. So I'll create a table, 2 columns. Left-hand side, as I said, is the transcript, and right-hand side will be where we create our code. So I'll just make it slightly smaller, but still enough space for us to create codes. And that's generally what we want in each of our transcripts, as I said. So I'll do the same for the second transcript, but that's how you want to set it up first. And then, as you would normally do, whether you're using software or not, we need to start coding. So like I said, it's an completely manual process. So we'll be reading and just creating codes or notes in the margin. Codes, essentially something that resembles notes or tags. So here, for example, somebody's talking about their background and previous experience and this sort of thing. It's up to you how you code it. I'll just say role and background, because that's basically what they are talking about. So this code is generally for this section right here. And then we move on and just keep reading. So here the question is, how did you basically become interested in this topic? But the answer is not just that. It's actually talking about misrepresentation. So misrepresentation is often ignored in AI models. That's what this person is saying. So that's generally how I want to code it. The participant also says that the bias is embedded in the design. So bias is embedded in the design, which means that it really depends on it's deeply rooted in the design. So somebody trains that model, they are already biased because they come from certain population. So that's generally how I'm creating the codes. They are descriptive, as you know, again, from my other videos. They should be descriptive because later we'll be working just with the codes, and these codes should be telling us essentially what content we have in our data. So they should be descriptive, so it's easier for us to later remember. And by the way, the study is so hypothetical study, of course. We're trying to generally understand the role of cultural bias in training AI models. So what is it, and maybe what are the current challenges? How do we improve that situation? So if we do this kind of a study, the rationale is probably that there is this cultural bias and we're trying to overcome it. So anything that's relevant. But of course, when we code, we just code basically everything that they say. So here, as we move on, there is a question about assumptions, and the person says there is assumption of universality, which is another code that we create. So just whatever they say, we just move through this data and we try to reflect that in our coding. I can just create something here again. So basically models are biased and reflect a specific culture. The more the better, just anything that we can see. And remember not to make too many assumptions at the moment or interpretations. Just whatever they say, we try to reflect that in our codes. So I'm following this process for this transcript. I'm following the same process for the next transcript. So I'm moving from one transcript to another, just creating a whole bunch of codes. And I'll show you in a second what happens when I'm done. So here I've worked on the whole transcript. Now you can see I have many more codes. This is the first transcript. Then there is another transcript that I have. So again, I created all these codes. So the whole transcript, both transcripts are covered in codes. So what I want to do next, once I'm done with all my transcripts, we want to continue. So we're moving on to stage 2, focus coding, or sometimes called axial coding. What we need to do essentially is to take all of the codes from all the data, all the transcripts now, and we want to see one list of codes. We want them in a new file, just the codes, so we can look at them. They are our essentially insight into the data. So we want to look at the codes and start grouping them and organizing them into some sort of groups. But before I do it, what I also want to do is to indicate where the codes come from. And this will become much clearer as I show you the rest of the process. But generally, we do want to know where the codes come from. At the moment, they all look the same. So if I have them all in a new file, I will not know where they come from. I do need to know where they come from because I do need to be able to trace them back to the original source. If I can't remember, for example, what the code is about, I see challenge leaders who don't recognize the importance of cultural bias. That's fine, but what is it exactly, who said it, and what was the context? I need to be able to trace it back, and it will be easier if I color code these names, these labels. So that's what I'll do now. I'll select this and I'll just create for this file, so I'll know that for transcript number 2, all the codes are green. Then if I have more, I'll use maybe red ones. For me here, I only color code one of them because the other one will be just the standard default black color. If I have more, I may use yellow and purple and all other colors. And if I run out of colors in Microsoft Word, you can just use different fonts or whatever it is that you know it's specific to that file. So now you can see what happens once I move all the codes into one file. So here again, I only have 2 transcripts, but I just moved all my codes into one file and I'm looking at my codes. Now I may start making some decisions based on what I'm seeing here. So again, as I explained in my videos where I talk about coding, is generally your judgment. Not any deep insights or interpretations, just judgments saying, okay, I see a lot of codes about different challenges and problems, so let's just call them challenges and start moving some of the codes there. I know I have lots of codes about suggestions, so I'm creating this group of codes about suggestions because I want to start moving them there. I also have lots of codes. It doesn't have to happen straight away, instantly, like it's happening for me, but of course I'm familiar with it already. But as you move through these codes and you read them, you try to decide if there are any groups in which you can put them. Eventually you start making these decisions. For me, I just know that there are, let's say, good practices and suggestions and challenges. There are also other codes, so kind of uncategorized codes, so other codes, that's what I'll say. And I'm just creating these groups. And now as I'm moving through these codes, as you can see, I see some suggestions. I'll just cut and paste them into suggestions. If I see a challenge and there's another one and there's another one, so all of these are challenges, I'm just moving them to my challenges. There is another assumptions of universality, another challenge, so I'm moving that to challenges. There is another group of codes just about the actual cultural bias. All of it is arguably to some extent related, but some of them are kind of neutral. It's just explaining how it works. So cultural bias and influences, that's what I'll do. And it's right there, so I'll cut and paste it here. Role description is basically here in other codes. Who collected the data, how it was labeled influenced the data. So that's again about the bias, exclusion, misrepresentation. All of that is for our challenges. So that's what's happening. I'm just scrolling down and I'm just trying to make sure that every code belongs to a certain group. So if I see any good practices, I'll move them to good practices. It doesn't have to be anything specific. I was trying to decide between good practices or maybe recommendations or maybe current good practices and then desired practices, but it's completely up to you. It can be one or another, as long as it makes sense to you, or as long as it makes it easier for you to group all that data. So again, I'll keep doing this and you'll see in a few seconds the result of this process. And by the way, before I continue, don't forget that I offer private one-to-one tutorials on Zoom, among other services I offer, such as data analysis, humanizing AI, editing, and many other services. So have a look at my website, because many of you ask me if I provide any tutoring or services. So I do take it for granted that you know, but apparently it's not that obvious. So don't forget to check my website. Now let's get back to my coding. So as you can see, this is what I've done. So problems and challenges is a little bit different because I prepared it beforehand, but basically that's the outcome. Problems and challenges, bias and influences, various good practices, that's what I called it, other codes and suggestions. So all of it is grouped and categorized. And now remember color coding. So when I said it's so important to be able to trace these codes back, because what if I don't remember? Now I'm trying to, let's say, decide what is resistance and lack of engagement about? What was it? Was it about the company? Was it about the trainer, the person involved in training the model? If I don't remember, the fact that it's in green straight away tells me which transcript it comes from. So I can straight away go to this transcript. I don't even have to look, because I can use the find option and just paste it here. And sure enough, it just shows me exactly where the code is. So now I can start reading and remembering what the code was about. So that's why it's so important to use color coding. You can probably do without it, but it just makes things easier. So now we are in that focus coding stage, which is all about organizing the codes, and this is exactly what I've done. One more thing before I start thinking about the themes, which is, by the way, a very similar stage. It's still organizing, grouping more, even more than now, because at the moment it's just everything is organized, everything is in a group. The only difference between this and the thematic framework stage, where I try to develop the themes, is that in the latter, in the thematic work and analysis stage, I'm only deciding on what I want to keep, on things that are relevant and things that will help me answer the research question and communicate these answers. So again, feel free to watch my other videos where I explain exactly the logic behind that process, but in a nutshell, that's what the process involves. So at this stage, before I move on to my themes, what I want to do is also make sure that I get rid of all the duplicates. So there will be codes, especially the more transcripts you have, the more likely this is to happen. There will be codes that essentially describe the same or similar thing, because you are obviously working in different files, but people were sometimes mentioning similar things, which means that now you are very likely to have several codes about the same thing. So you have to do something about it. Namely, you have to basically merge them into one code. You don't need several codes about exactly the same thing. So for example, we can see it's one of many examples here, but we have this code playing down importance of bias. And then from another transcript, we have a code called trainers play down the role of bias and culture. So quite similar. They are both about the same kind of challenge or problem about playing down the importance of bias. So let's say I want to create one code that includes both of these codes. So what do we do now? And remember, what we're trying to do is we have to be able to find these codes, the original codes. So I don't want to just change the name and just delete one of them, because then I will never find where they actually come from, this new code came from. So what I'll do, I'll decide on a name. So let's say I do want it to be, at this point the colors don't really matter. I can even indicate it in bold or maybe in italics. It doesn't really matter, but I'll call it playing down the importance of bias and culture. So now, to indicate that this is a result of merging of two other codes, I'll use the comments option in Microsoft Word. So I'll just take this one first, trainers play down the importance, I'll cut it, and then I'll select my new code, I'll create a comment, I'll just paste this code, and then I'll take the other code, playing down the importance of bias, I'll cut it, and I'll also paste it here. And as you can see, it still has the same color, so I have this new code, but in the future, because I would not be able to find this, I even changed the wording. So if I go to the transcript, I'll use the search option as I did before. I will not be able to find this code because it's not there. I changed the wording. So instead, what I did now, I can clearly see, I can still see where this code comes from, what codes were included in this code, so I can very easily find the original source. So this kind of work will be taking place at this stage as well. I want to make sure that I clean everything up and I don't have these duplicates, so I don't have several codes about the same thing. And what happens next is basically a very similar process, as I said. So I don't even need to show you the whole process now, because what would happen, I would probably save this file as a new file. I'll call it themes or thematic framework. So I still have the record of my actual focus coding stage if I need to go back to it or maybe demonstrate it in my writing. But then in this new file, I'll paste all of this. And this time I'll start thinking about the themes. So this stage, like I said, is very similar, except that there are some small differences in the logic. You're trying to focus on the themes, on something that actually helps you answer the research questions. At the same time, if you're unsure about anything, you do go back to the data constantly and quite frequently, because you want to remember what it was about before, for example, renaming a code. So basically, at this stage, you're also paying attention much more to how the codes, how you name the codes, so they sound nice and they're not all over the place and clumsy like these codes you can see now, because these codes are just for me, for myself. The themes are the final output, something I will put out there for people to see. So of course I want them to sound a little bit better, more consistent and more professional. And quite often within the themes, what happens again is more merging. So I decide on certain groups. So based on this, I may decide, for example, that I want to maybe group problems and challenges into several different groups, because there are problems that have to do with people, there are wider, broader problems. Maybe I want to introduce additional grouping. Maybe I want to introduce a completely different theme, in fact, in which case I'll start taking things from these current groups and putting into the theme. But then again, I do want to indicate, and that's important, to indicate where they come from, so I can always trace this back. But otherwise, it's a very similar process. Now I'll show you example of themes that I created, themes and sub-themes that I created as a result of this process. And now we can see the final themes. To avoid having too much mess in the comments section, in the Microsoft Word comments section, I changed the approach, so now they are indicated in brackets. all the original codes, or rather the focus codes that were used for each theme, because there is quite a few. So if I kept using the comments, they would eventually collapse. I would have to expand each comment to see it. So instead I put them in brackets. But you can see that there are some changes. So there is a theme about human and organizational challenges, and there are several challenges such as neglect of cultural bias in general, and then all the codes about the ignorance and playing down the importance of it. So there is the role of cultural, which was mainly under the other codes, or maybe rather in the bias and influences group. There are technical and ethical challenges. So it's just a different organization. It looks cleaned up. It's a little bit better now. So this could easily serve as the thematic framework. So now, as I promised, I also said I would indicate where you can use AI, ChatGPT, or any other AI, Gemini or Claude or anything for this process. You can bring that AI at any stage. The later you bring this AI, of course, the better, in terms of the analysis being your analysis, and in terms of you being sure that this is rigorous and in depth, and like I said, your real analysis. But you can experiment at different stages. I described the whole process in one of my ebooks, which is really popular and pretty affordable. So have a look at this ebook. I shared all the prompts that you need as well for that process. But just in a nutshell, to run you through the process, where I would normally not hesitate to use some support from AI would be, for example, at the stage where I have my focus codes, and maybe I'm thinking of how can I possibly turn them into themes. So at the stage where I have all my focus codes ready in the groups that I showed you before, I could take these codes, paste them into ChatGPT, and explain what they are, explaining their focus codes for a study exploring cultural bias, challenges, ways forward, suggestions, whatever, ways to improve. Take these codes and give me some ideas, some suggestions for themes. So that's where it can turn these codes into themes. You can, of course, do that even sooner. So following the initial stage where you have all these messy initial codes, you can use ChatGPT at that stage. So you can, again, your prompt could just explain their initial codes, and all you want it to do is to group them into some groups. At that stage, I would probably not even mention the research questions, because I don't want it to overthink or to start interpreting things, which I would also indicate in my prompt. So I would say just create groups, objective groups, based on the topics of these codes. I would explain that I want all the codes to be grouped, don't want any codes being left out. So it will probably do a decent job at putting them in these focus groups. So in fact, I may even be more likely to employ ChatGPT at that stage than at the stage of creating themes, because creating themes does involve some sort of creativity and also your judgment. So ideally, I would want to be involved in creating my themes, because it's my study and I want to be responsible for the findings. But the stage where you turn your initial codes into the focus codes is literally just an automatic and objective process. There is no real interpretation involved, and there are no real implications of whether you used any tools to support the process. As I said, I do have an ebook in which I go through the whole process of just using ChatGPT for the full process. But this video is about Microsoft Word, so that's what I wanted to show you. As I said earlier, remember, if you struggle, I do offer plenty of different forms of support. Otherwise, put your questions in the comments if you have any questions about this process. I would appreciate it if you like the video, if you learned something new, and subscribe to this channel if you're new around here. My goal is to develop it considerably in the next few months, so any help would be greatly appreciated. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one.